Well, good afternoon, folks. Welcome to this Leap Indiana fourth Monday coffee hour. As a side note, we are recording these sessions and we are going to be posting them on the Leap Indiana organization's YouTube site. So please be aware that the recording is in process. My name is Molly Hare. I am one of the co-chairs of the programming committee for Leap Indiana, and we are thrilled to be putting on these series of fourth Monday coffee hours. We're glad you're here to join us. And we're going to get started with today's topic. So today's topic is designing a virtual exchange, how to integrate global and intercultural learning into any course. So we're privileged to have Lemia Scherzinger from IUPUI. She's a senior instructor in the Department of Kinesiology. She's going to give us some great insight today into this particular topic. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or save them to the end. We'll save a little bit of time at the conclusion for some question and answer period where Lemia can give us some further information. And without further ado, I'm going to allow Lemia to share her screen and get started right away. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, guys. So make sure that pops up. All right, you guys can see that now. Okay. And I apologize. So I had to last minute move because my husband is off today and he decided this was the exact time he needed to make chili. So there was pots and cooking and chopping. And so that's why marriage is great. And then so I moved to my daughter's room. So she's 12. So the background, and then they're mowing right outside the window. So it's like, it's a perfect storm. So I apologize for any background noise. But hopefully you can hear me better. So then it would have been downstairs. So today I want to talk to you about virtual exchanges and how they can be implemented into your course, whether that's a face-to-face course or that is an online course or even a hybrid course, in order to help integrate some global and intercultural learning into your class. First, I'll talk about what is a virtual exchange. If you've never heard of it, think of it as an opportunity to provide a study abroad on a smaller scale in your course using technology. So first and foremost, it is technology enabled. There has to be some sort of technology because you're connecting with another institution from another country. It should be something that's sustained, right? You're developing relationships with these institutions and these instructors. And so it's not something that you want to just do and then jump out. It's something that you're creating these sustained relationships. And it's all about connecting people. And while we could argue that the cultures between, say, an Indiana school and a California school can be different, right? What we're really talking about is looking at different countries. And so I'll talk a little bit about my experiences. I'm currently doing different virtual exchanges with universities in the United Kingdom, Venezuela, and the Netherlands. So three very different cultures and bring different things, and it's provided different situations for my students to explore. So I've kind of broken up today into 4 parts about how to create a virtual exchange. And to really, in each of these, I'll try to give you some ideas because I'm going to guess we all come from different backgrounds, different institutions, and different topics that we're teaching, majors that we're teaching. So how you can implement it no matter what you are teaching. So the first and foremost is how to find a partner. That's a great place to start. So when we are looking for a partner, the things we want to keep in mind are a few things. So the first thing is you want to start thinking about what do you want, how much work do you want your partner bringing, and how much are you going to put into this project, and how you're going to split up the project, and how much input do you want from their institution and your institution, and what kind of characteristics are you looking for with this. So each of my partners are very different, and each of them provide something a little bit different when we meet and in the projects that we do together. But they each work for different reasons, and I'll talk about those as we go along. But you also want to look at, obviously, financial things are, the finances of the whole program is very important. So when we look at a virtual exchange, the great thing about it is that when we compare it to, say, a study abroad, it can be at a no cost, right? To implement it into my students, they don't have to pay any extra to participate in this virtual exchange. Whereas in a study abroad, obviously, there's a lot of extra costs. So this is a great thing to use to bring global learning to students that normally would not gain those opportunities. However, sometimes depending on the programs you use and the projects you implement, there might be a financial cost. The good thing is virtual exchanges are becoming quite popular, so there's a lot of funding available out there if you look for it. And then finally, staffing. So do you have, or do you need a particular number of staff to help you with and help you implement your project that way? So ways that you can do, find your partner, is to start looking at who you know, or who you know that knows other people. So looking at your connections, looking at conferences, what, whether or not you've heard someone present on a topic that interests you that may be from another institution, or even just looking at the research and seeing who kind of is the top there that you could start to have a conversation with. And what I did from my own institutions was a kind of two-part. So the first one is this, it's called this SUNY COIL. And what it is it helps, so COIL stands for Collaborative Online International Learning. It's another way of saying virtual exchanges. So you will find a little bit of different language depending on where you're at. IUPUI, which is where I teach, is a member. So what they provide are a lot of different activities to find partners. And so what I went to is a partnering fair, and it's kind of like speed dating. You put up your interests and what you want to do in your virtual exchange and find people who have similar interests. The great thing about virtual exchange is you do not have to find courses that are the same subject as yours. And I'll talk about some examples of those. But so if there is a topic that someone puts out there and you're like, I could put that into my class, it could be a whole different topic than what you're teaching on. I teach nutrition and I teach exercise, and we all eat and we all should be moving. We should be exercising. So it lends itself very easily to other topics. And I get that. But I'll give you some examples, talk about other ways that you can implement it, depending on what you're doing. Of course, you could find like instructors in the same field and find projects through that way. But you can also branch out a little bit. The actual first step of any virtual exchange is how to connect the students. As we know, the students, especially if it's in an online situation, it can be very hard for them to find the connections. In face-to-face, it's a little bit easier, but in your virtual exchange, everything's going to be online. So finding ways to kind of breaking that ice and allowing them to show a little bit of personality is a great way to start your project. So finding whether you put your students into partners or like a group, finding ways that can go beyond just a simple introduction. Hi, my name is Lemia and I was born here and this is my major, right? How can we kind of take it to that next level and give them that opportunity they need to become, to show who they really are? So I'll give you some different examples. I teach all asynchronous online classes. So mine is a little bit different than if you teach a face-to-face or even a synchronous online course. So in the synchronous session, what we want to do is give them shorter guided activities, whereas an asynchronous allows for that time for more in-depth exploration. And you can, in the synchronous sessions, actually link to asynchronous activities they can do later if you'd like to. So some examples can be something like, right now, if we were all in this week, I could say, you have 1 minute and I want you to find something blank, right? A certain color, the weirdest thing you can find, something that's from your childhood, whatever, and you give them a minute, and then they bring it in, and you can start to call on them and they can share, right? Something else you can do is say, change your Zoom background to a place you want to visit, so that way, again, we can, so maybe our partners from a different country really want to visit America, or from America, it just so happens, that this is their dream vacation of the partners that we're talking to. And it's a great way to start to break down those barriers. For asynchronous, you can use, obviously, there's all sorts of technologies out there, whether it's through Google, through Slack, through a traditional discussion board. I use something called Course Networking, or CN Post, that is kind of like a academic social media platform. And it's very similar. If you know Facebook, you can post pictures, you can post videos, you can also, and then you put discussions and people can respond. So that's what I use, but there's so many different opportunities out there. So whatever you're comfortable with, as well as what your partner's comfortable with. And then you want to really encourage them to continue coming back there so that they can continue the conversation. One thing I do is that instead of just opening it up to, say, all 200 students that may be in those courses, we put them in groups so that it's not so overwhelming, that they're only replying, and then they really get to know their group or their partners. But whatever you choose, obviously we want to make it more fun than we would, say, a typical assignment, discussion assignment. Very personalized and inclusive. So for example, you don't want to ask them, what is the favorite vacation you've ever taken? You can reword it to say, what is a vacation you would, your dream vacation that you'd like to take? Because a lot of our students, and depending on the country that you are partnered with, they may not be able to afford it or be able to visit to those places, but we can all have dreams, right? So that can be just something that can create some bonding without being exclusive. The actual interaction is going to start on your part as the instructor. So you want to start looking at a few things. You want to start seeing if you and your partner have some shared learning objectives that you can build upon, what exactly you want for the interactions, and then the course or collaborative project that they're going to be working on. So the best place to begin is their overlap. And we do that by looking at syllabi. So I'm going to share my experience in my very first virtual exchange was last year in the fall of 2020. And I partnered with, my first partner was from the United Kingdom. And because of the way their semester fell and our semester fell, we had 2 weeks to plan our project. Don't do that. While it worked out for, it was very basic. This year, we took the whole next year up until now to really build it. And so while it doesn't necessarily have to take a year, I would say at least a semester ahead of time, this is when you should start building this project, right? So exchange those syllabi, take a look. Is there some sort of intersection where they all overlap? Whether that's through the topics you're covering, the learning objectives you have, or any kind of assignments. So in each of the my partners, they teach something with nutrition. It's not the exact course, and in fact, my course is a general education course. So I may not even have anybody who's majoring in nutrition or any sort of exercise science or anything like that. So they may be an English major. So nutrition this is just, a general ed they have to take. They may never do anything else. Well, all the other ones are either some sort of like nutrition chemistry, or they're becoming, it's registered dietitian programs, much heavier into the science of nutrition. And so we have had to be very careful, because what their students' knowledge is coming with, my students may not have that knowledge, but we found a commonality in the topics, right? The next thing you want to do is start meeting with your partners and decide what of the virtual exchange. So for example, I'm going to pair a nutrition course with an anthropology course, okay? So 2 different courses. But what we're going to look at is how culture and where you live plays a role in your nutrition, right? So 2 different topics, but we're going to focus on something that each of those students could talk about, right? They don't have to necessarily have a background in anthropology to understand that, if I live in Venezuela, my daily nutrition is going to look much different than Indiana students. Another thing that they could look at, how does our government influence what we eat. While we may or may not realize there are guidelines out there put by the government, as a kid, it was the food guide pyramid. Now it's the My Plate. But what other countries have can look a lot different. And so how does that influence it? Or for example, in the United Kingdom, they have a sugar tax. We have tried that in the United States, didn't go over very well because it's the whole, impingement of freedom of what you're eating. And so while some states some cities implemented it, it went away. But in the UK, it's been in there and it's done fine. So why is that? How, what influences that? And, could something like that ever be put into another country? And it allows for a lot of discussion there. So then you're going to decide on your interaction format and length. So for a minimum length of this, I would encourage you to have 3 to 4 weeks. Anything less than that, you're not going to have time for the icebreakers, the team building, the projects, and then the actual assessment that you're going to implement. For this new improved fall semester program, we are doing 7 weeks. So a couple of those weeks we're kind of onboarding on each of our sides with our students, and then the actual project itself. So their interactions with the other group may only last 4 of those 7 weeks, but there's an onboarding and kind of an exit week as well. And you can kind of look at the different ways that you can do asynchronous versus synchronous. And these can also be crossed between the types of classes. So for example, you can do a presentation and set it at a certain time. And I actually partnered this fall with one of our theme learning communities, our first year seminars for our freshman students. And myself and the instructor for that course, she's allowed me to come into her course, use that course time to do things like these presentations, so that I can implement a synchronous section into this project. And that's worked really, really well. So you can kind of combine the two depending on where you're at and what your resources are. And then finally, you want to kind of look at how much structure do they need and how much do I want to put into that. So for example, here we can provide discussion questions within a Zoom meeting. And again, this is centering around, does your country have a national dish? What defines it? And what are the main restaurants and takeouts where you live? And how do those differ? So we can discuss that in person or in our Zoom session. And then I'm going to take it outside of the class by then posting on that course networking I mentioned, or CN Post, so they can kind of take it to that next level. Okay, so I'm providing a support in the synchronous session and then giving them a little nudge for that asynchronous session. So moving on then to the actual assignments. So it's really important to know that there's difference between the interactions they're having with me, with the other students, with the other instructor, and then the assessment piece. So the interactions are all about the icebreakers, the discussions, things like that. And the assessments then are going to be ways that you can actually measure their knowledge. And so whether that's through a paper or presentation or questionnaires. I personally do presentations and then also questionnaires, and I'll talk about those in a moment. Sorry. So first and foremost, when creating assessment, obviously tying it to a learning objective. So how can you tie it into it? This is kind of basic course creation 101, but you don't want to create a project that has no tie to your original course objectives. And that we can fall prey to that because we're like, oh, this is so great. And then you implement this course assessment and it doesn't tie to anything that they're supposed to learn. So really making sure to do that. You want to also then tie it to the theme of the virtual exchange. So as you can kind of see in some of my examples, mine are all tying back to the theme of where we live, where we grow up, how that influences what we eat and how we eat. And then, obviously drawing on the research that's there, what they learn from their partners and what they learn from the virtual exchange as a whole. So in the summer is when I pair with the school from Venezuela, the institution there. And what we decided, she was a nutrition chemistry instructor. And my students, if I even talk a little bit of science in my general education courses, they get very scared. So we do very little chemistry. We talk about the chemistry of things like carbohydrates, very simple things, right? So I was like, well, we can't go there because my students would cry. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on global nutrition. We each implemented a piece of this. I specifically have a chapter we cover on global nutrition, but she covers a lot of things like biotechnology and sustainable agriculture techniques. There we found that alignment, right? And the United Nations has 17 sustainable development goals that target all of these kind of biotechnology national resources, specifically to nutrition, on about 4 or 5 of them. So we took those, we told our students to pick one of those, and then they developed a PowerPoint presentation with their partner from Venezuela. And what was really fun is we said, we want you to take one of the issues that these development goals are trying to focus on and make up a solution. It doesn't have to be realistic, right? You're not going to cure world hunger. I mean, if you do, then please put my name on that. But you're not going to cure it. So how can we use it, just expand a little bit? And, what's the issue in Venezuela that's also an issue in the United States? And something that, unfortunately, we can say is clean water, access to clean water, safe water. And so some of them talked about that. We can also say, the erosion of natural resources. Both of us are having issues. So what could we, and they just came up with some really fun ways to do this. And because we didn't put limitations on kind of the imagination, it created a lot of fun opportunity there. So finally, I'm going to wrap up with some design considerations, and then I know there's a couple questions I'll address and kind of leave it open for you guys to provide some, ideas, because hopefully this is providing some, oh, I could do this kind of moments. So the first and foremost is the obvious one, time zone. So in Venezuela, they're actually on the same time zone, except for with time change, then it's just an hour difference. So that was really simple. The United Kingdom is 5 or 6, again, depending on time change. And then the Netherlands is, it can be 6, I believe 6 or 7. Something to understand is not everybody has time change. So realizing that just because in the Midwest we have daylight savings doesn't mean the other countries too. So that affects it. I know that some of my colleagues have connections in Asian countries, and those are like 12, 13 hours difference. So you have to really take that in consideration of who you want to partner with, because if you want it to be synchronous, you're going to have to take that into consideration. And if you teach a 10 o'clock class here, you're not going to be able to implement that with a country, like China, for example, who's like, I think it's 13 hours ahead. So it just wouldn't work. So you have to kind of take that into consideration. Obviously, language can be an issue. So what's been, I guess, my saving grace is that a lot of the nutrition courses, because of the world we live in, they need to learn how to do a lot of this stuff in English, because that's how a lot of the standards are put out. That's how they have to kind of do a lot of their projects. So a lot of them wanting to pair with English speaking students because they want to have them practice their English. So if this is going to be something where they have to do a lot of collaboration, think about, if the project is saying, my students don't speak English, then it's not going to be a good partnership. Unless you're a language teacher, right? So for example, if I'm a Spanish teacher and I want my students just to give an opportunity to practice Spanish with native speakers, I could pick any subject that they're teaching. And my students' whole thing could be to work with them to work on their Spanish, while the other students could be implementing something else. And that's another thing. What your final project, your final assessment is, does not have to be the final assessment of your partner if that doesn't work, right? So you can have your end result be 2 different things if you'd like. The communication platform. Some of these other institutions have access to. Some of these they do not. Some countries do not let Facebook be utilized by their students. They don't let social media be utilized by the students for academic purposes, so you can't use those. Sometimes they like, for example, LinkedIn or course networking, they both have an ability to provide a portfolio for the students, or like a resume. So that's a great way if you want to implement that piece into your students' work, that they can be creating a program or creating this project while at the same time building up a resume on the same platform. And then just realizing that they just, there may be a cost to some of these things. While they're free for us, they may not be free for our partners. So just keeping that in mind. And then privacy is a huge thing. Again, depending on the country, there are strict privacy rules. For example, they may not be able to use their own name or picture on some of these platforms. So a way that, you can find a way around it is that they can be assigned a Bob Smith kind of name. And that is on the back end of the instructor, they know who Bob Smith is, right? If that's going to be a big issue. You also may have limitations of when the students may participate. Like I said before, they may not be able to participate in a social media platform on academic time, right? So that may be another policy. Calendars. So that was the biggest issue, is when I paired with the United Kingdom, is that they don't have the traditional fall, spring, summer sessions that we do, right? And I was like, what? I just never thought of that. Like, I just thought like that was the way it is. Or Venezuela has their seasons are completely flipped from us. And not every country is going to celebrate the same holidays that we do, right? So those have to be thought about way ahead of time when you're figuring out that timeline. Because if they're going on a break on week 3 of your project, that's not going to work, right? So you really need to start thinking about that and implementing that also into when. And that's the hardest part, is finding those perfect alignments that you don't have issues on either side. And then assessing. So there are surveys out there that can assess cultural and global learning that are already, you don't have to, recreate the wheel here. Like they're out there, they're heavily researched upon, they're very strong. So you could utilize that. And there are ones that you can say, basically the pre-assessment is, how comfortable are you working with someone who has a different background, culture than you, who English isn't their first language, that sort of thing, and then do a post one. And it's actually fantastic to see the growth that the students experience, because many of our students, unless they're in a specific program that focuses this can be their first time with any kind of cultural or global learning component to it. And they're very nervous. And then they come out of it and they're like, that was so great. That was a great eye opener. I would have never gotten that opportunity to meet someone from the Netherlands unless I had done this, because I'm not going on a study abroad. I'm not going to be able to travel. I also do, so I use those, but I also do personal surveys specifically on the project that they did. So I can get feedback as well on that. And then other considerations is make sure you have set up meetings on a regular basis with your instructor. Like any relationship, it has to be a two-way street, right? So you have to make sure that both of you are on the same page, and that so for myself and my partners, we usually meet a couple of times in the semester before the project, then a couple of weeks before the project starts, the day before the project starts, and then throughout, and then we have a wrap up, and we kind of just continue that. You need a backup plan, because if it's going to go wrong, or if there's an issue that could go wrong, it's going to go wrong. So for example, when I did my synchronous session with my United Kingdom students, I was so happy. There was over 100 kids. I took so much time to put them in breakout rooms with their partners, only to learn that the email addresses, the way that I implemented them and the way that they were logging on in Zoom, it was flipped. So none of them went to their assigned break rooms. So I was sitting there, I'm like, why aren't your students going into the rooms? And they're like, oh, it's probably because of this. And I'm like, yeah, it probably would have been good to know beforehand, but whatever. So then we just randomly assigned them. And while it wasn't as perfect as I wanted it to be, because they weren't with their specific partners, then I learned what I should probably do is say, hey, Betty and Bob, you're in group 1. So when I put those breakout groups, you self-select group 1, right? So that they're physically putting themselves in those groups instead of me putting it ahead of time. The group sizes and composition. So for example, the students from Venezuela, while they do know some English, it's obviously not their first language. It can be sometimes the exact translation of words aren't perfect. And so I wouldn't want to put them, one Venezuelan student with 3 United States students. It would be too overwhelming for them, right? They would feel like they don't want to talk because their English isn't great. So what we needed to do is really make those groups fair and ensure that they're not feeling overwhelmed. And then student motivation. So the first time in the United Kingdom, they did not grade this assignment, and I did. All of my students participated. Like 10 of their students participated because they weren't being graded, it was extra. And so the next time around, they implement it into their curriculum. And so now they're being graded as well. So that's really a big piece as well. And then beyond anything, you have to have flexibility because things are going to come and happen and overwhelm you. And all of a sudden, what you thought was going to work isn't going to work. And if you're not flexible, this is not going to be successful. So also implementing that idea of flexibility into your students' minds, right? Like you're going to have issues, maybe they get the time wrong when they're supposed to meet you because of the time, so just keeping that in mind and being flexible with it. So hopefully what, I kind of talked about here is that it can be done any discipline, any topic. It can be done over any length of time. So again, I would say at the minimum 3 to 4 weeks, using any technology. And if you are interested, I'm part of a virtual exchange community practice at IUPUI. And so if you are interested in kind of some of the resources that are available, this is a great place to go. These are the chairs of that community practice, and they are fantastic for providing support for this. So that would be a great resource for you as well. And then I just wanted to kind of turn it over and see what questions we had. I'll stop sharing quickly and see. All right, so Sherry asked, can you discuss the platforms you use? So like I had mentioned, so I did use course networking, and through IU, it can be implemented into your Canvas course. However, so that the United Kingdom could utilize it, we just use, it's like if you go to vcn.com, it's an actual website, you can create what's called a network, and it's free for both the United Kingdom and for my students. So they didn't have to pay anything extra. Yeah, I can do that, Rebecca. And so the reason I used that is that it was a free discussion platform. I did not have to implement it. So for some of my colleagues have tried to bring other students into their Canvas courses, and IU does not like that because it's opening up a lot there for a lot of issues there. So it was a headache. So whatever you use, what I would say is give it a cross, make sure that it is accessible outside of whatever your LMS is and not just accessible through that LMS. Let me pull up those email addresses really quickly for you, Rebecca. Just 1 second. There you go. All right, and then Nancy, you were asking about the exchange partner. So SUNY COIL can help you with this if your institution is a partner of SUNY COIL, because like everything, it requires you to kind of come in, but they are great resources. You can go to their website and kind of find some names, some partners that they're already partners with, that they've already formed relationships with. So I use them for my Venezuela and Netherlands, but my United Kingdom, I went to my Office of International Affairs, and they knew of some institutions that wanted some partners. So I would also encourage you, depending on where you work, Nancy, that if you have a similar, I would assume, they will know some contacts to provide, or at least at the very least provide you with kind of a resource to go to. So yes, so don't, again, I wouldn't start Googling like, oh, all these universities, because that's overwhelming, right? There's so many other universities. I would go to the resources that are there. First and foremost, your Office of International Affairs or whatever is similar at where you work. So yeah, so right now I'm using Zoom for my synchronous sessions, the couple synchronous sessions that we have, because I found that at all of the institutions, it's also free and accessible, and they can utilize that. Also, and this course networking has been what we've been using for our discussions. And if people are really interested, I can even show you what that looks like. But we have kind of, the course networking isn't perfect because on the grading end, it doesn't like connect with my grade book or anything. So my students actually have to screenshot their interactions and send to me. So it depends on how you're going to be grading the discussions. You might want to find a different way to do it. If you're more interested in just creating kind of that authentic connections, the things like course networking is fine. If you're using it for more of a grading and assessment platform, it is a little bit depending on how many students you have. So, I can have in one section of my class, I can have 75 to 100 students. So to go through 75 or 100 of their posts plus the partner's post would be too much. So that's why they're having to do screenshots. So if you're going to grade them for that, I would be careful of it. That would be my big thing. I would then use a different kind of platform. So whether that's kind of like a Google Jamboard or something like that might be better, would be my advice there.
One way of framing this, it sounds like, this is almost in lieu of study abroad. Do you know if any of the people who participated domestically or internationally have gone on to physically exchange? I guess we're under COVID now, and probably not, but.
Yeah, so that's actually, Dom, a great question. So I'm going to kind of go 2 points on here. But the first one is I have Lynn, who is one of the names I shared. It was an initial virtual exchange that then led to a study abroad. So the students connected virtually for a few weeks, and then they went, it was actually, I think in Hong Kong that they went to with another, she teaches in the School of Business. So you can do that. You can even connect it to a study abroad. Since obviously I started in 2020 when we did not do any study abroads, but my partner in the United Kingdom and the Netherlands were both talking about once things open up a little bit to add a piece where whether it is we exchange, kind of do a student exchange, or even like the faculty kind of each go to each other's campuses, talk to those students, in that way. So yes, you can for sure build that upon it. It would be interesting to know if there's any research that shows students that participate in virtual exchanges are more likely then to participate in study abroad. I don't know if it's been it's been around for a while, but I don't know if it's been implemented in this way that we have that data yet. My other thing is I know a lot of people who have participated in study abroad will argue that this isn't study abroad, and I completely agree. It's not. This is not a replacement for study abroad. This is just a different component of providing global and cultural learning for our students. So it is not the same as going to a country, living there for, whether it's a month or whatever. But it has allowed my students to have their world a little bit bigger, especially in a time when it's been very closed off. It also, hopefully, Dom, it would maybe interest them like, oh my gosh, now I really do want to kind of travel a little bit, when they may at first been like, no, America's good, right? Like, I don't want to travel. So I think that it will hopefully broaden their kind of global and it's flipped on the other side. So what was really interesting is that in our Netherlands, one of the preconceived notions is that America is lazy. And so what it's helped also, so like, for example, they were speaking about, one student was like, we found that a lot of Americans don't eat breakfast because they're too lazy to get up in the mornings to eat it. And my students were like, no, it's because we have to get up to work before we go to school, right? Like, and it's because our idea of like work is a little bit different than theirs, right? It's a little bit go, 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 go. And there is like, you're going to get up and have breakfast. You're going to bike to work or school. You're going to have a nice, and it's just a different culture. And so it's provided them to have these preconceived notions truth be told to them, right? What is it actually? Why do we have the reputations we have? Why do you have the reputation we have? And opening those up. And it's been a great way to see, again, those barriers come down and really learning. So it's not just on our students' end, it's on their students' end too. And afterwards, the instructor was like, I am so sorry. Like I was so angry when I heard that, because I didn't want, like, that was so, I was like, no, it's fine. It's, you know, it's like the idea that, because they were saying, you know, I think all American food is barbecue and pizza. Like, and I'm like, okay, maybe where you live, if you're in Texas or something, but but like, it's like opening up that conversation and allowing those just authentic conversations to happen has been a great experience for the students, a really eye-opening on both ends. So yeah, it's hopefully too then providing ways for us to find those connections where we wouldn't have previously. Any other questions? Well, then I'm going to thank you. I'll turn it back over to Molly. If you have further questions, or if you need help, like especially the finding resources, I know it can be overwhelming if you're starting from scratch. Those emails, and then I'll put my email, and I'm willing to help you out in any way I could too. And depending on depending on what you teach, through all of my 3 different connections, I can help maybe find you a partner as well. So please feel free to reach out. And with any other questions or any help you may need, to either me or Lynn or Rob, we're all willing to help if we can.
Well, thank you so much, Lemia, for sharing with us today. I'd like to encourage everybody to go down to your reactions button in the bottom of your Zoom, and let's give Lemia a round of applause with our clapping hands. This is just so eye-opening to think about the considerations and the possibilities that are out there that I just didn't think about previous to now. So wonderful presentation, Lemia, and thank you so much for sharing with us today. I do want to thank you all for being here today, and I want to remind you that our next fourth Monday coffee hour session will be November 29th, and that is with Gloria Priest from IU Kokomo, and she's going to be talking about direct learning in the classroom using your Canvas tools. So if you're one of those campuses that use the LMS of Canvas, then you'll want to tune in on the 29th at 12:30. So again, thank you all for spending your time with us today, and I hope you have a great Monday.